I'm Dr. Stephen Martin, Executive Director for the CPASS Foundation. As we all know, our world is changing. Our economy is changing. It's so important to have all the information to help guide your kid into this very daunting new economy that we're all experiencing. CPASS Foundation is here to not only provide that information, but also make you aware of the various programs that are happening in the state of Illinois around STEM, summer academies, and other rigorous programs that will get your kid ready for the challenges of this new economy. We'll arm you with the information that you need to have that conversation with your kid's academic counselor, and with your kid's teacher, so that you can ensure that they are, one, taking the classes that they need to be taking, but also being prepared for college entry as well as graduate and professional school. Not every kid wants to be a physician. Maybe your kid wants to go into robotic healthcare. Maybe your kid wants to be into health law. There are so many fields that are available to our kids that we may not know of, but having a STEM background and being STEM ready ensures that they can pick whatever they want to be. That's why CPASS Foundation is here and ready to work with you and walk that journey, ensuring that our students are ready, have that background and awareness of what's out there so they can make the right choices for their careers and then be ready to participate in this new emerging market.
And welcome to Where Are All the Black Male Doctors, a panel discussion presented by the CPASS Foundation, focusing on the pipeline challenges facing Black male students interested in STEM and health careers. I'm Dr. Eric Whitaker, founder of Zing Health and chairman of the CPASS Foundation. I'm extremely honored for CPASS to host this important discussion featuring our esteemed moderator, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I want to take a moment and recognize all of our program partners and sponsors who have supported our mission at CPASS Foundation. That includes Zing Health, Inc., Complete Care Management Partners, Midwest Broadcasting Corporation, which is WVON 1690 AM and VON TV, TBT News, Health and Medicine Policy Research Group, the Institute of Medicine of Chicago, the Cook County Physicians Association, SMASH, Rosalind Franklin University of Medicine and Science, Chicago Medical School, the University of Illinois at Chicago Urban Health Program, and Real Men Charities. And I want to thank all of them for their support. I would also like to thank our longtime creative and digital partner, JinJa Birkenbeuel, the CEO of Birk Creative, for her work in creating and shaping our foundation's brand, driving our social media outreach strategy, and producing this special event in partnership with our team. The COVID-19 pandemic exposed the dire and disproportionate impact systemic racism has created in the healthcare system, which has resulted in significant confusion and high numbers of illness and death in Black and Brown communities. If the US medical system had adequate representation of Black men and women practicing doctors, we may have had better health outcomes in the country in 2020 and more adoption of preventive measures, including vaccinations, ramping up and ongoing in 2021. However, Black students face numerous obstacles, from systemic racism to economic disadvantage in their medical training. In this short NPR report, we'll hear from several Black physicians who have had to overcome racial barriers in their medical training.
African Americans make up more than 13% of the U.S. population, yet only 5% of American physicians are Black. That lack of representation is not only a problem within medicine, it also perpetuates a sense that medical and mental health care is not of or for the Black community. NPR's Yuki Noguchi reports on the experience of young African American physicians about where they see challenges for those in training now.
Growing up near Washington, D.C., Danielle Hairston had models for what she calls Black excellence.
I had the example of a Black woman pediatrician, and so it never occurred to me like I couldn't become a doctor.
Hairston is now the director of psychiatry residency at Howard University, educating young Black doctors herself. But she's routinely questioned about her rightful place there, like one white woman who saw her badge.
And she's yelling like, "You're a doctor? Oh my God, you?
Hairston says this type of reception is routine among Black colleagues, They're questioned entering the physician's lounge, in elevators. One of Hairston's white colleagues ignored her at a patient's bedside.
He's like, oh, well, the psychiatrist will be here to speak to you soon. And I was like, I'm right here. And he's like, oh my gosh, like, I thought you were the sitter. And he's like, oh my God, I don't know why I said that. And I was like, oh, it's because I'm Black. And I don't even necessarily think that he's racist. It's just that that's the bias.
Institutions everywhere are confronting the impacts of racism and inequity that persist in their system. Medicine is no different. Lack of access isn't just a problem for Black patients who continue to face economic and social barriers to care. The gaps are evident in the profession itself. Black physicians remain in a disproportionately small minority, and many say that's because medical training itself alienates them, perpetuating those gaps. And those gaps, says Hairston, have real impact on the care patients receive.
If you're ignoring this part of their experience, if you're not understanding the impact of being Black on them and their country and on their mental health, you're doing a disservice to them, and I don't know how you can treat them effectively.
Altha Stewart agrees. She became the first Black president of the American Psychiatric Association 2 years ago. She trained in the late 1970s in Philadelphia. She considered herself lucky. She had Black mentors who helped shepherd her and teach her about the needs of the African American community.
I know residents who don't even have that even today in 2020.
So it was for Anthony Chin Kui, who is Black. He finished his training as an ear, nose, and throat surgeon 4 years ago.
The number of Black men in medicine is very, very small. The number of Black men in surgery is orders of magnitude smaller. And the number of Black men in specialized surgeries like ENT is tiny, tiny.
Chin Kui says mistreatment came shrouded in subtlety. For years, he didn't even suspect racism.
They wouldn't say that Tony's lazy to my face. They would say that Tony's not efficient.
That's in spite of the fact Chin Kui's work and hours matched his white counterparts. Already sleep-deprived, he worked harder. Yet criticisms persisted, and Chin Kui questioned his sanity. He fell into a major depression.
That's the danger of this whole profession and being Black in this profession, is that because it's so silent and because it's so invisible, you just think you're going crazy for thinking it because you can't prove it.
His struggles became an open secret. The only other Black physician turned a blind eye.
It helped to bolster this idea that what was happening to me had nothing to do with race. Because I was thinking to myself, if it did, this Black doctor would reach out and let me know. But he didn't.
Chin Kui gritted it out.
And it was only last year, actually, that I sat down with my colleague who went through residency alongside me and brought up to me, and you could tell this kind of been weighing on him for a long time. Like, yeah, they used to say a lot of stuff about you.
That colleague was Matt Smith.
I'm a pediatric ear, nose, and throat surgeon in Cincinnati, Ohio.
After training, Smith grew closer to Chin Kui.
He is one of the smartest people that I have ever met and one of the most talented. That's including outside of medicine as well.
Smith is white. He says he believes comments he heard from some supervisors about Chin Kui were racist.
While nothing was overtly said as an inflammatory comment, I would say that there are those biting remarks that lead to microaggressions and build up over time.
Initially, Smith said nothing to Chin Kui.
At that time, what I thought, if he didn't know those things were being said, then it wouldn't affect him necessarily directly. And as I went along, things continued to go the way they did. I realized that that was not the right approach to take.
Smith is now outspoken about social justice with his medical students. He's starting a program to mentor minority school children to expose them to medicine.
Until there are changes made in the pipeline, all you're going to get is what you put into the system.
Therein lies the problem and the opportunity. Chin Kui agrees, but also says it isn't just about seeing more people like him in the job.
The goal can't just be getting more Black doctors into medicine. Getting them there is vital because having someone who cares for your health, who understands and has lived through the struggles personally and culturally that you've experienced is super, super, super important.
That's one systemic change medicine needs, in other words, to overcome some of the barriers to care. Yuki Noguchi, NPR News.
The CPASS Foundation exists to change the lack of Black medical student representation, introducing minority students to STEM subjects, and offering training and mentorship in Illinois to support our scholars. By exposing and educating Black and Brown students on the educational pathways and career opportunities STEM has to offer, CPASS leadership and partners create a trusted pipeline to activate more schools, families, and communities to decide to engage more young people to choose health and health tech degrees. Things are not so different from what they were in 1982 when I was a junior at St. Rita High School and participated in the Chicago Area Health and Medical Careers Program, which we affectionately call CHAMPS. At that time, CHAMPS gave students with a desire and aptitude for healthcare careers viable pathways to success. It was instrumental in bringing STEM education to underserved communities. And my career would not have been possible without the CHAMPS support and mentorship in college and medical school. In fact, a couple of speakers are folks who I've known from my time in CHAMPS in high school. For those reasons, we're asking for your support of CPASS and our life-changing programs. By enabling us to nurture underserved students' interest in and love for STEM subjects, you're helping us prepare the future doctors, scientists, engineers, developers, programmers, and more. On behalf of the CPASS board, we welcome your engagement in this effort to change the lives of so many Black and Brown children and to prepare our youth for the health and health tech careers of the future. Joining me as a panelist to speak on the importance of Black male doctors and a diverse physician workforce are really three of my friends and physician colleagues. Dr. Terry Mason is the first. Dr. Mason is the host of Doctor in the House on Chicago's WVON 1690 AM, and he's been doing that for 30 plus years. And he's also founder of Trevention for Life, a former city and county health commissioner and former head of urology at Chicago's Mercy Hospital. He has dedicated his career to improving public health in minority communities. Next up is Dr. William McDade. Dr. McDade is currently the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the Accreditation Council for Graduate Medical Education, also known as ACGME. And this is the group that's responsible for all of the postgraduate training of doctors in the country. He leads both internal and external diversity and inclusion initiatives. He served as professor of anesthesia and critical care at the University of Chicago, where he completed terms as deputy provost for research and minority issues and as associate dean for multicultural affairs at the Pritzker School of Medicine. Prior to his role at ACGME, Dr. McDade served as the executive vice president and chief academic officer for Ochsner Health Systems in New Orleans. And lastly, Dr. Derek Robinson. Dr. Robinson is vice president and chief medical officer for Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Illinois, and is responsible for care management operations, clinical leadership, and strategic oversight in providing high-value healthcare to more than 8 million members. He has led community efforts to promote diversity and inclusion in undergraduate and postgraduate education at the local, state, and national levels, and is a member of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion Advisory Committee at ACGME. Additionally, Dr. Robinson is vice chair of the Board of Trustees at Xavier University of Louisiana. And leading us in a discussion on this important issue is our esteemed moderator, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. Dr. Dyson is a prolific author and speaker, having authored more than 20 books, including New York Times bestsellers, The Black Presidency, Barack Obama and the Politics of Race in America, and Tears We Cannot Stop, a sermon to white America. And my favorite actually is Jay-Z, Made in America. So kudos to you, Dr. Dyson, on that one. Dr. Dyson has taught at many distinguished universities, including Brown, Columbia, and Georgetown, and I believe is now at Vanderbilt. Thank you, Dr. Dyson, on behalf of CPASS Foundation, for your voice and for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much, Dr. Whitaker, for this wonderful opportunity. Sister JinJa and all the other folk who are responsible for us coming together, and all these wonderful physicians this team of doctors that we have tonight. I might ask some personal questions since I got all these cats lined up, but I'll try to do the business first. It's a wonderful opportunity to be here. Of course, here we are in the midst of so much transition in the culture and so much extraordinary conflict. And as Black men in particular, we are facing tremendous difficulties. And so to talk about Black male doctors, where have all the Black male doctors gone? And when you think about the overall percentage, as the NPR piece showed, that 5% of physicians are Black, we know 5.8% are Latino, 17.1% are Asian, and 56.2% are Caucasian or white. And so we see that we are working against the odds to generate a strong physician community by increasing the numbers, but also by addressing the systemic factors that discourage young people from pursuing STEM, and then also getting fluent in the languages of science and, the kinds of serious engagement with STEM that would lead to a successful career as a physician. So here we are tonight, we can't deny history that took place tonight, that the former officer, Derek Chauvin, was convicted on all 3 charges that had been laid against him in court. We'll see what happens when the judge decides how much time he gets and how those sentences are carried out simultaneously or concurrently, as they say. But still, it's a victory because in that sense, obviously, racism is a public health phenomenon. It's an issue that we have to deal with. Heightened blood pressure, hypertension, the increase in glucose in the body, the sugars, the transformation of one substance to another that floods our bodies, the sugars that flood our bodies, the way in which the stress exacerbates tensions and creates enormous difficulties for us as people of color, especially as Black people in this nation. And here we are, on the one hand, dealing with the fact of the high skepticism of medical epistemology. That is the way in which knowledge is generated in the culture, because Black people are like, I ain't taking that vaccine unless they call it a black scene. And if they don't call it a black scene, I ain't down with it. And, they bring up, of course, Tuskegee, but I said, well, they were trying to deny Negroes medicine, man. They're trying to give you medicine now. So do understand the difference there. We understand Henrietta Lacks up the road here. I'm in DC, up the road here in Baltimore, where they harvested her eternal cells to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, benefiting everybody but her and her family. And the way in which we are skeptical about the harvesting of those cells without her consent, as in the Tuskegee experiment. So I tell people, Black folk ain't afraid of science. We're afraid of scientists. We ain't afraid of medicine. We're afraid of doctors. It's what you're going to do with what you have. So when I talk about that big word epistemology, the way in which knowledge is transmitted, medical epistemology is generated out of a context where, on the one hand, science is both degraded for the last 4 years particularly, and in some instances, uncritically paid obeisance and genuflecting before the altar of. So what we have to do is to get a kind of mean, an appreciation for the critical capacity of scientific rationality, for medical epistemology, and for the wonderful capacity of physicians to heal us, to help set up in the body processes of healing, but at the same time, to be duly skeptical about the manipulation of that scientific rationality for purposes that are nefarious and problematic. So that's why informed consent is extremely important. The Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, is extremely important. A couple more things, and then we'll get into this, because I ain't no doctor. I'm just playing one on TV. So on the one hand, you've got studies coming out saying, look, even when you control for money, when you control for wealth, when you control for income, And when you control for status, white and black people going to the doctor get differential treatment. Say if they got, a heart issue, they're going to be far more aggressive, and both of them are making 150 to 200 grand, and they go to see a doctor. There is still differential treatment according to the black person than the white person. There's far more aggressive treatment for the white patient than there is for the black patient. So you can't suggest that it's merely economic inequality that might account for the differential treatment according to average black and brown and white people. Even when we control for similar situations, there is enormous disparity. And then I'm sure you all saw this report that came out that said that infants have a better chance of survival. Infants that are black have a better chance of survival when they have black doctors. Now I want to go, well, dadgum. It ain't like the white doctors going around saying, we don't like those black kids, get them out of here. At least not all of them, not most of them. So what does that suggest? Does that suggest that there is some kind of unknown etiology? Let me put on my doctor cap and floss a little bit. If there's an unknown origin of a particular malady to which a particular child is subject, that there's a greater sense of curiosity in a black physician, they're going to go the extra mile. Let me figure what's going on. Let me pay special attention. Let me do my homework. Let me go back and hit those books and dust off those medical journals and JAMA and whatever else we need to look at to discover the New England Journal of Medicine and discover what particular studies, what particular empirical studies have been done to substantiate a certain kind of protocol, medically speaking, that should be adopted. So even there, being black makes a difference because it helps our infants. Maybe we understand empathetically that could be my child. That could be my son's child. That could be my granddaughter. That could be my grandson. That could be somebody's child that I know. And so all of these non-medical factors factor into not only a kind of attention to medical care, but the ways in which we continue to have these differential treatment, these disparate outcomes that are predicated upon a rather divergent set of attentions that are paid to black and non-black patients as well. So that's enough for me. I'm a preacher. I'm a professor. I ain't no doctor. We got these tremendous physicians who are here. And I want to tell, CPASS is extraordinary because it's doing a great job of trying to highlight, underscore, and really focus on the necessity for more black physicians. We got a bunch of lawyers. I'm not trying to say we should have less lawyers. That ain't my point. Because, see, the doctor keeps you alive long enough for you to go to court. So the two are related in some degree, but the doctor might be the priority because if the doctor don't keep you well, you ain't going to go to court because you ain't going to be here. So we're going to have to give love to the physician, to the physicians to begin with. But let me, and I want to say that, of course, of all of these physicians, and I know Dr. Terry Mason, my man, 50 grand. I've been knowing Dr. Mason. I've been treated by Dr. Mason, an extraordinary physician and a good brother. And of course, Dr. McDade was critical in my son, Mawada, who got his medical degree in anesthesiology. See, I'm trying to keep black people woke and he putting them to sleep. But it was extremely important to have the support of Dr. McDade, but to have Dr. Whitaker, Dr. Mason, Dr. McDade, and Dr. Robinson here is extremely important. I just want briefly for the folk so they'll be curious. I just want you briefly, all of you physicians, identify yourself in order just to tell us, what it is that inspired you to become a doctor. Because some of y'all coming from neighborhoods where you ain't seen no doctors, where you haven't had the visible role modeling and mentoring of a physician in order to encourage you. So tell us how each of you very briefly came into the field of medicine.
Well, I guess I'll start.
Start with Dr. Mason, right? Okay.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation. And I want to thank Eric and the tremendous work that he's doing with CPASS, as well as with Zing Healthcare, because this is a Black man doing some tremendous things. And I can't give enough credit to him. And I can't tell you how proud I am of him in terms of what he's trying to do. Let me just say that my impetus for going to medical school started back when I was about 17, 18 years old, when I became a member of the Nation of Islam. And at that time, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had the picture of an Islamic medical center in the centerfold of the then Muhammad Speaks newspaper. And there was a reality that really permeated everything that I had that says, I need to be a doctor working in and for our people in that place. And so I changed my majors in an undergraduate school to biology, and the rest is history. And so that was my major impetus. And I've had strong Black men. My sixth grade science teacher was also a major influencer for me to go into the sciences, when we used to have classes that began an hour before school started at sixth grade. And Mr. Wright would teach us science. In fact, he taught science so well, he never told us the books that he taught from. All I know is that I didn't learn anything new in science from going to Mr. Wright's class in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade until I got to started on my undergraduate degree at Loyola University. That's what he did. He didn't, as long as we understood it, he kept going, never, ever uncovering it. So those are the two impetuses for me.
Dr. Whitaker, who's next?
Well, I'll jump in, and you know, I don't know if I believe in serendipity. You know, I do believe in divine intervention, and when I say serendipity, my mother was at a grocery store when I was a sophomore in high school and bumped into my eighth grade teacher, and she told her about that program I mentioned earlier, the CHAMPS program, and as a consequence of that serendipity, I went to CHAMPS as a junior in high school at IIT, and two other of my classmates went, and we all became doctors. And you know, and one of the things we tried to do with CPASS is make sure that serendipity, you know, it doesn't have to be bumping into a teacher in a grocery store, but you know, on the CPASS website, we've cataloged every STEM program in the state of Illinois, so that any parent, guardian, advisor can go there and find a STEM program that's just for girls, or that's doing things and help move things along. You know, I would say my inspiration, my mother was a nurse, and you know, family lore has it that she whispered in the ear of all three of her boys, and I was the only one that listened. And so I ended up, you know, going into medicine, and not unlike Derek is saying, you know, Terry Mason and Bill McDade have been role models and mentors to me the whole way through. So wouldn't be here without the CHAMPS program and these two good brothers who I just mentioned.
Okay, very good, very good. Dr. McDade.
Well, thanks very much for the intro there. I say that the way that I became a doctor was really more straightforward. I have a Ph.D. and I was interested in science my entire way through. And so when I got to college, I was fortunate enough to be introduced to a biochemist at the University of Chicago who suggested that I consider both medical school as well as the work that I was considering to do in science. Because he said that, you know, the profound question is, can you answer questions with science? They're going to benefit mankind. And that's why I wanted to try to combine the two. And so I only applied to one medical school, as it turns out, from that experience. And I got into the one medical school I applied to, and they accepted me into the MD Ph.D. program. And I pursued research in sickle cell disease through the advice of a good mentor and colleague of mine, Dr. James Bowman. Late Dr. Bowman was also a sickle cell researcher who really felt that having an African-American think about disease, the sickle cell disease in particular, at the level of basic science was essential. And so I was very happy to pursue that particular course. That's kind of how I met Eric, as a matter of fact. I was a graduate student at the time, and Eric, about 15 years old then, came to my laboratory. I think I was about 19 or 20. And he came in the lab, and we actually sat at the electron microscope, and he looked at fibers of sickle hemoglobin. And my hope is that that helped to stimulate him to think about a career in science and medicine. But Eric became a colleague and friend ever since. The way I ended up in anesthesia is I wanted to figure out how to actually combine clinical medicine, which I found I actually had a passion for while I was in medical school training, with the basic science that I did. And so one of the observations that I was able to make early on in my career in research was looking at how nitric oxide actually changes the way that sickle hemoglobin forms fibers and causes it to destabilize. And looking at small molecule solutions to try to treat sickle cell disease was one of the things that I focused on when I was engaged in research. But what I realized early on is that there weren't enough African Americans in medicine. And I diverted my research career to a large extent to think about solving that particular problem. And that one I'm still working on 30 years later.
Wow. Well, you helped my son out, Mawada Dyson. So he's Dr. Mawada Dyson because of your persistence and your support. He's very grateful to you for that. So we appreciate you, and working with Dr. James Bowman, who's the father of Valerie Jarrett, as I recall, and a prominent figure at the University of Chicago. And you and I have something in common as well. You got a PhD and an MED and an MD. So do I. I got a PhD from Princeton and an MD. My mama named me Michael Dyson. So, we're pretty equal in that sense. And my initials are MED, so I guess I got medicine in my name. I don't know. All right.
No doubt. No doubt.
All right. I think we got what left, Dr. Robinson?
Yes, sir, Dr. Dyson. Thank you so much. It's a privilege to be on the panel today. I want to thank CPASS Foundation. I was raised right, and so I really did, like I said earlier, have to wait on these legends in medicine to speak first, because I truly stand on their shoulders. And I want to publicly thank all of you for the role that you've played in my development as a young physician leader here in Chicago. So unlike my mentors, I'm actually from Shreveport, Louisiana, grandson of sharecroppers. Always had a desire to become a physician, but I think probably the sentinel event that really catalyzed my desire was I had an uncle who became really ill with a rare form of stomach cancer when I was in high school. And he complained for many months about the problem, really wasn't able to get good access and good diagnostics until that cancer had progressed, and he wasn't able to survive that cancer. But I will tell you that I didn't have a CPASS Foundation when I was coming up. Did not know an African-American male or female physician in my community that I could reach out and touch and say, hey, I want to be exactly like that individual. But fortunately, I was blessed to be pointed in the direction of Xavier University of Louisiana in New Orleans. Xavier did an excellent job in preparing me for medical school. I applied to a number of medical schools. Howard University College of Medicine gave me the opportunity to become a physician. I had really great exposure across all medical specialties, as well as areas of healthcare leadership, which really helped me broaden my aperture. As I graduated from Howard and came out to Chicago for residency in emergency medicine, and subsequently went to business school and remained in the area and have had some progressive leadership opportunities. But I'm grateful again for the opportunity to participate in discussion. And that's a brief synopsis of how I got into medicine.
Very good. Well, that's excellent. So much knowledge up in here and so much insight. So let's jump into some of this, right? So what's led us to this point to have this kind of conversation after integration, all the extraordinary things that have been done at the height of STEM, especially for Black people in the 1970s, we were moving and shaking, so to speak. And then, that was the golden era of recruitment for Black doctors. What's happened, ironically enough, in post-integration, where, there's been a thinning out, if you will, of the concentration of Black folk in HBCUs, for instance, right? What happened in Howard or Meharry or Morehouse and the like. Has integration dissipated the concentrated effect of recruiting Black doctors? What is it in your mind that has led to the diminishment of the numbers of Black doctors?
It's a great question. And I think that that there are many facets to that answer, to that question. There's some real interesting side effects of the integration movement, as far as I could see. I think that, and we need to take a critical look at what some of those things are and how do we recover from them, particularly as we look at what's happened to our own institutions. There was a book written that said that at one time we had as many as 500 hospitals that were Black owned throughout the United States. Today we have 0.
Right.
And we started schools like Howard and Meharry and others because, quite frankly, we were faced with a problem very similar to what we have today. That is our people, particularly Black men, not being admitted necessarily in the numbers that we would have been, particularly in our own institutions. That said, I don't mean that we should not continue to move and get majority institutions to admit African American men. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that there are so many other things that are going on, and I sit on the Urban Health Program Committee for the University of Illinois, and we're seeing what's happened and even how the role of who is a minority has changed and how that might be affecting some of the enrollment, because now who counts besides African Americans as minorities? So there are a number of issues. And I think lastly, I would say that we have some real issues, and that's why I'm so proud of what Eric is doing and the CPASS Foundation, is to really try and encourage our students to get an opportunity to be engaged in science, technology, engineering, and math, because those are the building blocks they need if they're going to be serious about a career in the health professions, whether it be in medicine or any other area, but certainly in medicine. And, you know, it was Judge Pensham who said, you can't be what you can't see. And we need these young men to be able to see us as a way to hold a beacon of hope that one day they may be able to take our place. And I think that's the way most of us feel.
Okay. Before I get to the question of the specificity of gender here, to problematize it a bit, let me ask you all this question too. Throw this out. So are we being disserved with the stereotype that science is not for young Black men, that STEM is not for young Black men, that somehow they're, you know, the stereotyping of young Black men is uninterested in learning, not having academic curiosity? Are we overlooking the ways in which we can address the kind of implicit bias against young Black men in recruiting them into fields, you know, that are involving science, technology, engineering, and math, so that they have the potential to become a biophysicist or a biochemist or a theoretical physicist or, you know, a physician? Are we doing a disservice by, you know, saying, well, Black folk get into the arts and science, you know, but not the hard science, so to speak. They're in the social science, they can sociology, but not math or trigonometry or what's going on. So give me a sense of, you know, how we can better recruit young Black men and overcome some of the barriers that discourage them from thinking that they can do well in these fields.
Well, I think that's a very difficult question. It has many levels of complexity. First of all, I think the schools have to do a better job of educating our young Black youth. And we can't really blame the lack of inspiration in pursuing science on them. We have to really start with driving home the idea that it's our teachers who instill that curiosity, that they're people who are naturally curious who don't really have the inspiration to drive them to heightened levels of curiosity. And what I found when I was at the University of Chicago is that we could recruit people as early as freshmen in high school, after your first year of high school, between that first year and second year, bring them into our one top research institution like the University of Chicago, put them in a laboratory, give them the opportunity to learn what excellence is in science, and they never turn back. I think that what you have to do is give people the exposure and the experience, the opportunity. You have to give them people who can show them how to learn and how to stimulate that innate curiosity in order to drive them forward. I look at my colleague, Dr. Freeman Habrowski, who's the president at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and how he's able to stimulate his young learners through establishing learning communities in the Meyerhoff Scholars Program. It is not from a lack of curiosity that African-American young folks don't pursue careers in science. It's because they lack the opportunity, they lack the preparation in some situations, but more and than likely, they lack the community. One of the things that I always found fascinating was the annual Biomedical Research Symposium for Minority Students. It's a national conference of underrepresented minority students who would get together every year and all around the country. Now imagine this picture. You're in a large hotel ballroom. 2,000 African-American young folks are there talking about the posters that they're presenting at this conference while they're having breakfast. Each table has a different subject. Neuroscience is in one table. Molecular physics, biophysics is in another table. Genetics is yet another table. If you put that image on television, people wouldn't believe that it existed. That you've got a table of 20 people all talking about research, all stimulated in science, all Black and brown and indigenous, and no one would believe that it existed. It does. And I think that we can do more of that to try to further the objectives of trying to get more folks into STEM and to understand that you can actually have a career, a successful career in STEM.
Right. No, excellent, excellent. Let me turn to the issue of gender. I asked Dr. Robinson this question. So, why are we leaving out Black women? The lack of diversity in other professions, say dentistry and so on, from this conversation today. What is the value and the motivation to focus particularly on Black males and the lack of Black male participation within this field? Are we doing a disservice to women who may face barriers and obstacles that prevent them from flourishing within a medical establishment or within the medical field? So give us a sense of the rationale, because I'm sure some people in the audience are looking at us, why are they talking about the men and they ain't talking about the women? So let's talk about males versus females in terms of consideration and why we're focusing on men.
That's a great question. Let me start by declaring that we certainly value Black women in medicine. They play a very important role. And I think as we look at the current state, I think many of us would note that Black women who are entering the medical profession are actually enjoying some success from a statistical perspective that's greater than what we're seeing in African-American men. And certainly I think when we've looked at the data over the last 30 years, we've seen a very alarming trend in in the type of challenges that Black men have faced entering the field of medicine. I think another thing to keep in mind is that Black men also suffer significant health challenges, low levels of life expectancy, high levels of chronic disease. So, from the education arena all the way to health outcomes, Black men face some really significant challenges. The studies have shown that when there's racial concordance, and separate studies look at gender concordance, that patient compliance is a lot better. And a study in California that evaluated Black men when receiving care from Black physicians showed that they were more likely to be compliant, and there was could extrapolate that would also reduce the Black-white mortality gap, as well as death rate due to cardiovascular disease significantly by closing that racial concordance gap. So there are a lot of reasons, I think, for us to focus on the challenges that Black men are facing. We also know that our young men are flooded with a lot of media exposure that really send them in the direction of, pursuing music or pursuing sports or other careers. And then we look at some of the other stereotypes you talked about earlier that are out there as well. It also makes them less inspired, to go down the path that many of us have chosen. And so those young men do need inspiration. They do need to see us on the screen today. They need to see myths dispelled. And as Dr. McDade noted earlier, it's important to address the educational system where they learn. Teachers need to understand that. Teachers and counselors, that some of the myths that they believe that maybe bias them to not push our young men in the direction of pursuing a career in medicine, is really important to address those, and also ensuring that the educational infrastructure where our young people learn is stronger and more robust, that they have access to more advanced placement classes and advanced science classes in school. I mean, we know that our cities are still largely racially segregated. A lot of folks go to schools that are in their communities. We know that the tax base supports many of those public schools. And that means that places where many of our African-American men learn don't have the same quality infrastructure that we see in other communities. So that puts them at a significant disadvantage. But to bring it all home, it's important that, one of the subpopulations in the United States, Black men, that has amongst the shortest life expectancy, we've got to ensure that we're opening the doors to healthcare access to them. And one of the ways we can do that is ensuring that we have a workforce of Black men in medicine that represents that demographic in our nation's population.
Right. No, excellent. Dr. Whitaker, so how do we talk about systemic racism, given what Dr. Robinson just pointed to in terms of these barriers that prevent or discourage young Black men from pursuing medical education or even being mentored into a position where they're able to pursue it, and looking at all of the other indices that suggest difficulty? How do we talk about systemic racism? Here we are, on the day of a verdict that rarely held a police person to account for his egregious misbehavior, for his flagrant misconduct, and for murdering a Black man with little fear of consequence, and usually with impunity. So how do we talk about systemic racism, right? Because all the talk after George Floyd was systemic racism, systemic racism. You turn on the news in the morning, systemic racism. You turn on television in the afternoon, people talking about systemic racism, corporations speaking about systemic racism. Make it plain to us how systemic racism relates to the medical establishment and to the medical infrastructure, and how we speak about it, because every word that ends in system seems to perpetuate a legacy of inequity, right? Criminal justice system, public education system, healthcare system. So when we talk about medical education system, speak to us about how systemic racism manifests itself institutionally and not just individually.
Well, I mean, so many thoughts go through my mind as you're talking. And, when I was the state health commissioner of Illinois, and I was at a conference where this gentleman was talking about the challenge of public health and how do we change how public health is thought about so that we're not, always behind the 8 ball, like when something like COVID-19 happens. And I went up to him after the talk and I said, I have a question. You're an expert in media, and how do we change the perception of Black men in the United States? Mm-hmm. He paused and he said, I don't think you can. This is a white man. he said, I don't think you can. Wow. And which is profound, but I think that we still must try, and we have to be intentional. A lot of what we're talking about, like Dr. McDade mentioned, we have to highlight Black excellence, in all the corners that it exists. We have to be intentional when we look at the exams, the MCAT exam and how it's administered. And in fact, it would be helpful. Dr. McDade has an experience, with anesthesiologists and how they test and how it makes a difference about whether or not Black candidates actually complete their anesthesiology residency. And it's set up right now for Black anesthesiologists in training to fail. Bill, would you comment on that? Because this is a structural thing that we have to be attentive to as we have testing to get to different levels of education in medicine.
Sure, Eric. It's a really prime example of structural racism. The intent was entirely different than what the outcomes were. So the American Board of Anesthesia decided that they wanted anesthesia residents to study throughout their residency training. Before you would take your board certification at the very end of your residency after doing 4 years of training after medical school. But about 2012, they implemented a program where you take an exam on the basic sciences, the chemistry and physics of anesthesia early on after your second year of training, and then you take the clinical part of anesthesia after your 4th year of training. Well, what they didn't appreciate is that African Americans come into medical school with a different experience than their white counterparts. First of all, we don't have enough resources to pay for standardized test preparation, as was discussed earlier. We also don't have that much experience in taking standardized exams, even during medical school. And so our performance on the MCAT is a little bit lower than everybody else's. Our performance on the first part of the licensing exam, which is one of the metrics that medicine uses to determine whether or not you'll be accepted in competitive specialties. And so by the time we get to residency, we still haven't quite figured out how to do well on standardized exams. In part, it's because we're excluded from learning communities while we're in college, and we're excluded from learning communities when we're in medical school. We're not very often asked to join learning communities of Asian students or of white students. And if there are very few minority students, there's no opportunity to really share. Plus, we're also attacked by the idea of imposter syndrome, where we are told, because of the inherent structural racism that exists in society, that white superiority intellectually is the rule of the day. And so we come in there hiding, to some extent, our perceived inadequacies. And because you don't want people to know how much you don't know, you don't really share with anybody else because you're trying to maintain your pride. And unfortunately, you teach yourself, if you're teaching it by yourself, learning by yourself, incorrect things. So now when you get to residency, it's a different story. In residency, you're working side by side your white and Asian colleagues who never really invited you into their learning communities before. You recognize that you knew more than they did about some things. You recognize, because you're seeing their patients, you're signing out patients to one another, that you may know more about their patients than they did. You see them present, you knew an answer that they didn't know. And then when you get to be a senior, you get to work with younger residents, and you recognize that they didn't know a lot of what you knew when you were at that level. It demystifies the myth of white intellectual superiority. And it breaks down the stereotype threat that many African Americans feel when they're taking standardized exams, which contributes to the low score. When you're taking a standardized exam and you're thinking about those things that are imposed on you by the racist structure that you live in, you engage in rumination. You start thinking about things other than the exam question. And now while you're taking the exam, if it's a speeded exam, it's timed, then you are actually losing ground as you're thinking about these distracting elements. And so it's only through experience that demystifies white intellectual superiority that you then figure out that you can test well. And by the end of your residency, you actually do just as well in these on the board exam as your white counterparts did. But when you put it early, you haven't had that experience of being a senior resident. You haven't had that experience of demystifying white intellectual superiority. And so what happens is people fail. And we saw that the dismissal rate from residency was about 2 or 3-fold before they implemented that as blacks being dismissed to whites, and went up to 10-fold after the implementation of this. And so we're working with the American Board of Anesthesiology right now to reconsider that, to look at the data, to think about what can be done, because nobody on the American Board of Anesthesiology thought there'd be that disparate an impact of just moving this exam into a split exam where you separate basic science from clinical science and you move that test up 2 years. And that's the unseen consequence that came because of the disparate impact of racism.
Right. No, that's important. And then we think about Claude Still, who talked about stereotype threat, because you've been stereotyped as intellectually inferior, so that you have in your mind a ganging up on your consciousness of the belief somehow of your inherent inferiority that you've been taught and told, so that when you're taking tests thinking you're being judged against white students, it creates an enormous pressure, an extraneous pressure that subverts your potential to perform at your highest level. Of course, when white students are tested, when they're being told they're tested against Asian students, feel the same thing that black students feel vis-a-vis white students, because again, the stereotype that has been presented to them is that they are intellectually inferior, at least to the performance of Asian Americans on these tests. So I think that's an extremely important and valuable tool there. Let me ask about HBCUs and our HBCU medical schools. How important are they? We talked earlier about the golden age in the 70s, and we talked about post-integration, and we talked about desegregation and the ways in which the brain drain, the bright flight that occurred as a result of Black people gaining access into institutions of medical education that transcended Black communities, that went beyond Black communities, so that they didn't look at Meharry or Morehouse and the like. So give us the status of HBCU medical schools right now and the role they play, or the potential role they play, in encouraging young Black men to go to medical school.
Sure, I'll jump in. Let me first say that our HBCU medical schools still play an incredibly important role in educating African-American physicians in the United States. There's a recent analysis looked at the production of African-American medical school graduates from the 4 historically Black medical schools in the United States. And I believe over the last 10 years, they've produced more African-American graduates from those 4 medical schools than the top 10 predominantly white medical schools in the United States. I can share with you from my own experience as a graduate from Howard University College of Medicine. Although we were a historically Black medical school, we have a fairly diverse class. So we had a number of students that were Latino, white students that were immigrants from different parts of the world. So it was a diverse medical school, which created a really powerful learning experience for us. But yeah, that statistic I think stands, and they continue to play a very important role.
You know, I do want to say something too. You know, I had the honor of being on the, you know, we talked about the ACGME, which oversees all of the residency training programs. I'm an internal medicine doctor by training and sat on the internal medicine group that reviewed all residency programs in the country for 3 years. And at one meeting, I was in charge of reviewing Yale. And we had, at the same meeting, had one of the HBCU medical schools. They were dinging left and right the HBCU medical school. And then I reviewed Yale, and I started dinging Yale for the same things that they were just dinging the HBCU medical school for. Right. And they were like, well, Joe runs a great program, and so they were like, they were trying to speak away the ills, but I was like, well, yesterday you said that this is a problem. This happens to be Yale, it's the same problem. And so that's the way that it, this plays out in terms of how our institutions also get jammed up in the same way as we get jammed up as individuals.
Right. No, it makes a difference. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. But asterisks and exceptions seem to be made when applied to majority white institutions as opposed to Black institutions. So I think it's extremely important to understand the role that these institutions play in facilitating education for these young Black men. And especially given the fact that disproportionate numbers of Black students in general, even outside the sciences, who are Black, are still being educated in historically Black colleges and universities, disproportionate to our numbers in the population. So it seems to me that, as Dr. Robinson said, and you are suggesting as well, that these HBCUs continue to play an extremely important role in making certain that that these schools have a powerful influence over the lives of these Black students, and not to be dismissed and not to be seen as second rate or somehow incapable of imbuing students with an extraordinary education, because we can see that some of the best and the brightest, as we see here tonight, have either attended, been associated with, or otherwise benefited from their association with these institutions. So what do we need to do to help families and schools and communities understand the importance of diversity in STEM and healthcare careers? I approached this a bit earlier when I talked about, what happens in terms of encouraging STEM and what forces might prevent it. But what positive steps can we take to encourage, young Black men in particular, but Black people more broadly, in not only STEM education, but considering, the medical field as a viable one? And let me link that to this question. Is it that there's been an erosion of capital? A nice way of saying it. Another way of saying it is Is doctors still making what doctors used to make? Is that a disincentive? What about the fee structure? What about the income? What about the remuneration? Are those two things linked? The way to encourage, the pursuit of STEM education and young men becoming doctors, and the kind of money they used to make versus what they make now. Since Terry, you want to jump in on that?
Well, I'm a little bit out of that now, Mike. I used to be in private practice over 10 years ago.
Right.
And so things were very different then. There's been a what I would consider a seismic shift in the way medicine is practiced. When I was coming through, the goal was to get into practice. The goal was to have a practice. The goal was to join perhaps one other person. Now with the corporatization of medicine, most people are coming out looking for a job, not necessarily an opportunity. And they're very different. So it depends on, I think, especially on what it is you want to do and whether or not you want an academic track or a managerial track, because there are other tracks. We have Dr. Robinson sitting on this panel, who is an administrator, physician, emergency room trained physician, but is an administrator of a major insurance company. So I think some of the things are a bit different than they were when I was going through. But I will say this, that it is important that Black men see other Black men doing what it is that they think they want to do. And that started with me, as I said earlier in my opening remarks, with my science teacher, who was an articulate Black man, one of the only a few articulate Black men in 1965 or whatever it was that I saw. Right. And it was important to me. I said, God, he speaks well. I'd like to learn how to talk like that. But you don't know you have no idea sometimes what people, what children, what young men are watching about you.
Right.
And you don't know what might be something that inspires them. And so it because we're all sometimes very different, it behooves us all to make ourselves as available to these young men in the environments that we work. I mean, Dr. McDade is a magnificent scientist, but I don't know that I wouldn't have known how to approach a Dr. McDade in those days. And Dr. Whitaker, I used to see Dr. Whitaker many times, and sometimes you don't know the impact you have on somebody, and it may not be necessarily in a formal setting. Sometimes people need to see you as a human being who cares about other human beings. And I think that's a lot of what we've tried to do in my life. And I think that's what the message, I don't try to get people to see me as a doctor if they do because they know it already. But really, I want them to see me as a person, and that they as a person are endowed with the same basic opportunities that I might be endowed with, and maybe even more. And that they have an opportunity through the programs like CPASS. That's why we're all here. We're here because we want to create these opportunities for these young men and women to see that it's not insurmountable, that we did it and we weren't that much different than them. And we try to make sure we communicate with them on that level so that they can see that, hey, we're not brothers or sisters from another planet. We're from here, from some of the same communities you're from. And we want you to see, yeah, we're not trying to say you just do what we do and you're going to end up like we end up. No, we're saying that do what we did and you might end up better than we ended up. And that's what we've got to do, Mike. That's how I feel.
I'd like to build on Dr. Mason's comments there, because I think while the economics of medicine have evolved over time, physicians still enjoy good incomes and a lifestyle that's better than most individuals in our country. And so I think it's still a good profession for individuals to go in. I also think our career path is so layered that it's still hard for young men in our community to even see the other side of the conversation where we are and be able to separate the heyday of Dr. Mason's and the current state. So I think we do have to continue to strengthen that exposure. I just want to tell a brief story that's an example of this, and it involves folks on this call. So when I was a resident physician at the University of Chicago, even though I was close to medicine, my ability to see other Black men in medicine beyond the people I was training with, which was a very small group, was quite limited. So if we didn't have folks like Dr. McDade, who was leading the Bowman Society at that time at the U of C, Dr. Whitaker, who was in leadership there, creating that venue to bring folks together so you could actually see other individuals who shared a very similar background and similar challenges and opportunities, it makes it more challenging. And so I think likewise, as we go further upstream, outside of the residency program and back into the community with folks who are in primary and secondary education, we've got to do what the CPASS Foundation is doing. We've got to bring folks like individuals on this call and folks who feed into this work closer to those young people so that they can see that path forward and be inspired.
Right.
Well, let me speak up for the broke students here, because there are a lot of people who don't think they can go to medical school because it's so expensive. And the whole idea of graduating with the indebtedness that you graduate from medical school, the average medical school student graduates with over $200,000 in debt. That's like living in a house that you'll never live in. And that's just your tuition and fees from training. You bring your undergraduate loans in on top of that, and it becomes a serious consideration. So I think the medical schools that are actually going with no tuition, as there are about 4 or 5 of them in the country that are doing that right now, represent an opportunity that I think that we should seize upon as African Americans to go for those opportunities where you don't have the huge amount of debt that stops you from going into the less compensated specialties. I mean, you can't go into primary care pediatrics and make the sort of money that you make in that field and have $250,000 worth of debt to repay, or you'll never be able to live successfully. And I know some very venerable pediatricians who struggled their entire careers from a financial perspective right now, who really are stuck with that choice that they made many years ago because of the lack of reimbursement for care for poor kids.
Right. No, it makes a big difference, and that's extremely important to understand, because what do y'all think? Is it the fact that doctors produce more doctors, that, your daddy was a doctor, your grandfather was a doctor, your uncle was a doctor in Black communities? Is it the greater likelihood that, as you were saying earlier about, Judge Eugene Pencham, you can't be it if you don't see it. But are there prohibitive barriers when it comes to economics that, it's just like tennis, right? If you don't have these tennis courts in the inner city, the Serena and Venus are very rare. The reason more Black ball players are not in baseball is because those traveling teams that young people can get on are, prohibitive in terms of cost, so that AAU teams and the like, so that there are fewer and fewer Black ball players because of the costs of these traveling leagues. Well, is it the same thing to build on your point, Dr. McDade, is it the same thing when it comes to becoming a physician or a doctor, that even to get into the game, you got to lay plans early on. You got to, understand that you have capacity for chemistry and physics and biology and the like. And then you've got to parlay that into a career track where people inform you about what you've got to do. So that in your own instance, when you were, the M.D. Ph.D. program, you were guided and ably directed because of somebody mentoring you. So I guess I'm asking, what's the relationship between mentoring and the prospects of young Black men in particular becoming doctors?
I think it's strong. I mean, you don't even know the game. You don't know the game that you're getting into when you don't have someone that's been down that path before. And we see that with our students, applying to and going to college. And certainly when you layer on that a journey to medical school, as Dr. McDade laid out, it seems an enormous, insurmountable goal, right? But when you have individuals who can explain to you what it's like to apply to graduate or professional school, the loans that are available, and maybe even take you a little bit further to say, hey, by the way, when you go to medical school, be sure you look, consider the financial repercussions of what specialty you go into. I think folks can then make better decisions. Some of our students don't know the difference between a grant and a loan at the stage that they're looking to go into college. So we have to ensure that the financial literacy of both our students and their parents is strong, so that can support them in the process. And I think that mentoring plays an important role. And when you have that, your mom or your dad or your grandparent, did the same thing, it makes it a lot. I mean, they come to the game understanding how many quarters it is, how many minutes are in a quarter, and what you got to do to get to the end and win.
Right.
I definitely, I was a poor brother from the south side of Chicago. And I just remember in class one day, I was the only Black person in my class of 112 people at University of Chicago. And I was struggling to pay rent. And I was talking to one of my classmates, and he said, Eric, this is simple. All you need to do is have your parents, get a 3-bedroom apartment, buy it. You live in one of them. You charge enough rent for to the other 2 rooms to cover the mortgage. You have an appreciating asset. You can write off taxes, and he rolled it out. And I was like, bro, I'm just trying to rent an apartment. And I was lucky enough that Bill McDade took me in. I was struggling in school, and as the only brother in my class, I could get people to play basketball with me. No one would study with me. And Bill took me in and became my roommate for 3 of his 15 years of Ph.D. study. Okay, it might be 10 years, but that's the only way I survived is having someone who knew the game and could then tell me, Eric, there's exams that exist, which I didn't know about. I was taking the exam straight up and getting my butt kicked while people were coming in high-fiving each other because they all had the exam. And I almost walked out of school my first year until I got the exams. I started excelling. So it's complicated in terms of class. You layer on race. Half my class parents were physicians. So all of that we're talking here, it's a crazy student that we have to help young people, young Black men and Black women navigate, because it's a thicket to get from here to where we need them to go.
Yeah, let me, I want to say something to that, but let me first of all tell the audience, look, at about 8:35 Central, we're going to start taking questions. So put your questions in the Q&A. So we'll have your brilliant, insightful, radiant, illuminating questions. And hopefully with my glasses, I'll be able to read them, or Dr. JinJa can send them to me. So please, if you got questions and you want to know stuff, put it in the Q&A. So let me ask this question, and that is, to what degree is there camaraderie broadly felt in Black medical circles? Is there enormous competition? Is there hate going on? Are y'all a bunch of rappers? You got your group over here. Are you like a bunch of fraternities? You got your people, the anesthesiologists versus the pediatricians versus the gynecologists. I mean, so tell us how that operates. Do y'all talk to each other? Do y'all share information? Do you protect each other, or do you let people hang out? I mean, give us a sense of that.
Well, I can tell you what it used to be. I don't know what it is today, because I think things have changed. But one of the things that used to happen, because when I started out, you had just a few Black groups like the Williams Clinic, and you had a few other folks. And then when I went to go up to decide what I wanted to do, when I thought I wanted to be a urologist, I went and found out who all the Black urologists in the city were. And I scheduled an appointment with them like a patient for the last patient of the day. And I went and met with all of them, every one of them, and talked to them about, and I asked them questions about the day, what the day was like, how much money they made, all those sorts of things. And that sort of morphed into.
Did you have to pay to see them? Did you have to pay to see them? Did you act like a patient and put your card out? I mean, how did you?
No, I told, at the end, I told them what I was doing, and most, I think 100% of them said, they kind of liked the idea.
Right.
But what I will say is this, is that the SMA Student National Medical Association and the Cook County Physicians Association came together, and we started having an event yearly, where we actually brought in both the practicing physicians as well as the resident physicians and even the medical students to have a realities of medicine kind of discussion. And, I used to say to folks, If you're thinking about being a pediatrician, let me send you over to the Chicago Department of Streets and Sanitation, because you're going to make a lot more money on overtime with streets and sanitation you'll ever make trying to take care of children. Now, the point wasn't to try to really do that, but
Right.
we had to put the realities of the financial level of indebtedness that you've incurred, as well as what was mentioned by one of my other colleagues about what the salary structures are. And lastly, I would say that the other things that we have to do is that it's a different game these days. Nowadays, medicine is by and large corporate, and you really can see exactly a little better what's going on than you could in the days that I was doing this. So I would say that we need to continue what we're doing. I think it's coming up soon at Dr. Gregory Primus's house, where we'll have such a meeting. But people need to get the what I call the true realities of medicine. Because one of the things is, Dr. McDade and others have alluded to, many of our students now are graduating from medical school with tremendous debt, not just from medical school, but in terms of undergraduate school, later on to medical school. So we really need to think about this in a different sort of way. And we need to approach this with the truth of our situations and the realities of what we can do to sort of manage those.
Dr. Mason, don't gloss over the fact that you used to actually host us at your house back in the day. That's where I met you. Bringing together the old heads and then the medical students and the residents.
Yeah, that's an important piece of that. I would see how Terry lived, and I'd say, I got to do that one day.
Right. I mean, you know, I used to visit Terry's crib too. I wanted to be a doctor. I mean, you know, so I had to stick with the Ph.D. president. I couldn't be no big time doctor and everything. But no, that's extremely important, because it's those informal, I think, settings where people are inculcated into a culture of expectation, of appreciation for knowledge. And what you know, if you don't know it, you don't even know you don't know it, because you don't have enough intimate acquaintance with other physicians and other doctors who are Black and male who will give you the real deal. And as Dr. Mason talked about it, having that real deal is extremely important in terms of getting some information that will help you carry on as a physician. So speaking about, let me ask y'all before we start taking some questions from the audience, in terms of residency, talk to us, you know, about some of the barriers that you know contributes to a lack of diversity in the physician workforce. So is the USMLE Step 1 score, is that one of the contributors to the lack of diversity of physician workforce? First of all, somebody break down what that is. You know, you're down with OPP. Yeah, you know me. So somebody break down what the USMLE is, and then why that score is critical, and why that might potentially play a role in thwarting the diversity of the workforce among physicians.
So maybe I'll take a stab at that one. The USMLE is the U.S. Medical Licensing Examination. It comes in 3 parts. The first part you take after your second year of medical school. The second part you take after your third year of medical school. And the third part you take during your internship year or after you completed your internship year. You have to pass all 3 in order to get a license to practice medicine. And that is in addition to being board certified, which is a test you take from the American Board of whatever discipline you're in at the end of residency program. It is a self-check for the public to ensure that the doctors who are graduating from programs and residency programs that are accredited by the ACGME, where we say the program's good, but this is a check on the individual. And for medical school, we say the medical schools are good, the LCME does that, and this is a check of that. So in order to do well on the USMLE Step 1 exam, you have to be really good at taking standardized exams, because it tests you on the basic sciences that you should have learned in your first 2 years of medical school. Mm-hmm. And what I think has happened is that residency programs have placed an undue emphasis on the passage of that exam with a certain score. And in fact, some disciplines have even correlated the scores so they can predict how well you're going to do on your first attempt at your medical specialty board exam after your residency is over based on your USMLE Step 1 score. And the group that puts pressure on residency programs to have a high pass rate on that first time pass of your specialty exam is the ACGME. So the ACGME has just changed its standards to some extent to de-emphasize the first time test pass rate. And now we're starting to look at what we refer to as the ultimate pass rate, which is if you don't pass the board exam on the first time, you pass on the second time. If people who don't pass on the first 2 times, almost everybody passes on the third time. And there's been absolutely no data to show that passing it on the first time makes any difference in care outcomes for patients than if you passed it on the second time. And in fact, there's a paper that was in the Journal of the American Medical Association, JAMA, published back in 2009 by a fellow named David Ash. And what he looked at was outcomes of practicing obstetricians. And when he looked at what really mattered to how well you practiced as an obstetrician, that is what your complication rate was, that if you tried to look at the program's USMLE Step 1 score average, Step 2 score average, it didn't correlate with the physicians who had the lowest complication rate in practice. In fact, the only thing that correlated was what the complication rate was in the residency program in which you trained. If you went to a residency program that actually had its own practice with a low complication rate, you as a practicing physician graduate of that program practiced with a low complication rate, and it persisted for the next 17 years. If you went to a high complication rate residency program, you practiced with a high complication rate. And the difference between low and high is over 30% difference. And that persisted for the next 17 years. So it wasn't individual attributes like your USMLE Step 1 score, it's the clinical learning environment in which you train, which is why the emphasis should really be on making those clinical learning environments for training excellent, so that you will practice at high quality, delivering high quality care, low complication rates. The overemphasis on USMLE Step 1 was one of the main reasons why I actually joined the board of the National Board of Medical Examiners. And my intent was actually to eliminate one of the exams and try to reduce the importance of USMLE Step 1. Well, last January, the USMLE Step 1 has now decided that it's going to go to a pass-fail exam to decrease the emphasis on that 3-digit score that first and second year medical school students strive for and spend so many hours studying for. I think it's going to be good for diversity in those competitive fields that use the USMLE Step 1 score is almost current coin of the realm to determine whether or not you got into a neurosurgery program or a dermatology program or an orthopedic surgery program. We know people who have gotten into all those fields who've had board scores on Step 1 that weren't all that strong, and then went on to have illustrious careers as orthopedic surgeons, as dermatologists, as neurosurgeons, as specialists in various disciplines in internal medicine and pediatrics. So I would say that the de-emphasis on Step 1 has been probably the most important thing that's happened in the last few years. We just have to see it play out when the scores completely go away in 2022.
Mm-hmm. Excellent genealogy and digestion of an extremely important, factor when it comes to figuring out how we can encourage, the expansion of opportunity for physicians, because you got to know the game and you got to know the tricks and you got to know the rules. So 3 more questions before we get to our audience. First one is, how do we begin to move forward on this extremely important issue? It's a very general question, but an important one nonetheless. So who wants to, let's see, should I throw that?
I'll jump in.
All right, jump on in.
So I think one thing that we have to definitely move in a direction of is increased accountability and transparency around the type of performance that's coming through our medical education system. Dr. McDade is with the ACGME, so they have a good view on what's happening in our residency programs. We also have to take a look at what's happening in our medical school, the LCME area. But beyond the sort of moral imperative that we should have a workforce that's more representative of the number of African American men that are in society, there's got to be some accountability there. And I think when we put the business case around this, I think that helps kind of move institutions and move organizations. So we know health disparities aren't free. They cost money, billions of dollars in avoidable healthcare costs and lower productivity. And we know that African American men bear a significant burden of that. When we look at, payment for healthcare services, you look at insurance companies, you look at businesses, you look at individuals that are paying premiums. So how do we leverage that influence to change the productivity of the medical education pipeline to deliver a workforce that's what we need? And I know I've had a chance to work with Dr. McDade and others on some programs to do just that, to say, hey, we need our medical schools, we need our teaching hospitals to produce a workforce that looks like the community that's represented. And let's bring that into, the four corners of contractual documents and tie dollars to them so that then it's not just a nice to do if we get to it, but it's something that, hey, we're all going to rally around this because it affects the business enterprise, the economics of our educational process. So I think those are very key. Transparency, accountability, and ensuring that accountability not only is from a financial perspective, but also with leadership within those organizations.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, great answer. So second to last, we're getting down to it, y'all. So get your questions in the Q&A. Get them ready for these knowledgeable physicians who bring a wealth of information, both from their scientific and their medical background, but also their appreciation for the culture as well. So what societal recommendations need to be considered? So that would include like policy, endowment, lobbying strategy, and community, et cetera, to move us forward. So what's the strategic intervention on the governmental end, on the political end, on the social end, on the institutional end, and maybe even the corporate end, to make certain that these considerations should be brought to bear to increase the number of young Black males in the medical profession?
As I've said, and you've heard, a number of us have gone through pipeline programs that found us at a very impressionable age of 15 and 16. At one point, foundations like Robert Wood Johnson Foundation supported this sort of effort. The federal government through, I'm trying to remember what the acronym HRSA stands for. It's in the Department of Health and Human Services. They had a health career opportunity program funding. All of that money got decimated, and it supported things like CPASS all around the country. And I can tell you in Chicago, most every doctor of my vintage, we all went through that pipeline program. Yeah. And so those dollars disappeared. We have to make a recommitment to invest in funds that, as Derek laid out, will ultimately improve the health outcomes of our community, and also, again, create leaders who can lead in many fields of medicine across the board. And that's where exposure happens. We keep talking about getting exposed to the various ways you can be a doctor. That happens in STEM pipeline programs. So we have to, from a policy perspective, recommit as a country to those efforts, both in philanthropy and in government.
No, good stuff. Good stuff. All right, then. So here's the final question for the good doctors. Are there others that can align with us to address this problem? Who are the other folk, communities, organizations, organisms, entities that can help facilitate, the increase in numbers of young Black men, young Black males in the medical profession? We don't have to go it alone. Who are some of the allies that we can appeal to, that we can turn to make this happen?
There's allies aplenty. You've heard about academic medicine, and both at the medical school level, at the fellowship level, and so in the residency level. We're talking about philanthropy. We're talking about corporations that biotech, health services. There's all sorts of folks who can contribute from their corporate philanthropy to offering internships and exposure to again, the various ways that people can be impactful as physicians. And also, there's other, allied sciences, because, the pathway to become great in as a software developer and having a strong base in STEM is the same you need for medicine. So we can also have allies in the technology sphere. So it's going to take a lot of cash capital of investment, and it needs to come not only from government, but from philanthropy and from the corporate realms, I would say.
Okay.
What may I just add a little bit onto that? One of the things that we're requiring at ACGME now is that all residency programs engage in pre-residency learning programs. So to develop a pathway of people into medicine. Before, there was no requirement that graduate medical education had to do that. Now there is. And so they're going to be looking for you in community programs around the country to try to partner with you to help bring younger learners into medicine.
And we can use that kind of support. All right. We got the audience questions. Drum roll. Thanks, docs, for all the information. So now you get a chance to answer some of this. And we got names attached to them. I don't say we'll do a Jeopardy speed round, but we'll answer these in good shape. So Kenneth Furlow asks the question, how can we use hip hop? I'm not sure you guys know what hip hop, okay, I'm sorry. So how can we use hip hop culture and entrepreneurship interests to bring change in medicine and business and in healthcare delivery? So what's the role of hip hop culture and entrepreneurial spirit and entrepreneurship to bring change in medicine and business and in healthcare delivery? Anybody want to take a, I don't want to stereotype Dr. Robinson as the young person on the panel who could respond to that, but I'm just saying, I'm sure Dr. McDade is listening to Drake and Lil Wayne as we speak, but we might want to ask Dr. Robinson to jump on in there. Hello.
Oh man, I got stereotyped on that one for real.
I know, because you listen to classical music and blues and country, man. I'm sorry, bro. I'm so sorry. I mean,
Well, I'm not going to have the best answer to it, but I do know that it's a very strong vehicle for communicating and engaging with the demographic that we are really interested in inspiring and getting into medicine. And so I think it's definitely something for us to spend some time, seeing how we might leverage that. And I'll just pivot and say, one of the other areas of opportunity we have also is, how do we figure our way into sort of the athletics programs to ensure that we leverage that vehicle, which has a lot of African-American men in it, to ensure that it also becomes a pipeline for stimulating interest in medicine. So I like the question. I'm gonna work on an answer to it though.
I just did you wrong. I just did you wrong. See, I'm the real hip hop head and I'm an old man. So let me just say this. I think to piggyback on your excellent answer, look, I think one of the things, Brother Furlow, we can do is look at, the demographic of those, hip hop stars. Think about Drake, 150 million, Jay-Z, a billionaire, Diddy worth 950 million, Dr. Dre, 820 million, Kanye, bless his heart, a billion. So even if you talk about the convergence of, entrepreneurship and hip hop culture, obviously, one of the things that hip hop culture has done is expanded the reach of financial wizards, of financial instruments, of making sure that accountants have jobs, managers have jobs, but physicians as well. I mean, given the fact that, we got too many of these young people taking that scissor and doing other things that lead to negative medical consequences, let's put it that way, in their bodies, but also more broadly beyond the utilitarian, the crassly utilitarian, is the fact that we can use that as a messaging board, right? To talk about the need to get physicians and doctors to create, opportunities. One of the things that some rappers talk about is the fact that, all they say we have is sports and entertainment. And we need to look beyond sports and entertainment. Imagine if we're getting that message. I mean, Nas is about to do a deal that's going to be worth $100 million. So entrepreneurship is certainly there. And if we can tack on a serious concern for not only health, but also the medical profession, where we get young people interested in becoming physicians, then the messages that are communicated through hip hop could be extremely important. I hope that helps answer that. Anonymous asks, Speak to the pros and cons of playing the game while navigating being the only resident or medical student of color.
I'm not, I haven't been in that situation in most of my educational career. I don't know what, in terms of playing the game means. I was always authentically Black, and everybody knew I was Black. so I mean, the thing that was helpful was, again, having a community that was supportive of me in that setting. In fact, the janitors at the medical school was probably as responsible for me getting through school as anybody else, because white folks would cut me out of things, and because they were seen as invisible, people would talk freely around them, and then they would tell me, Eric, you need to go to room J109. Because they were trying to cut me out of things. But I was, at least if I'm speaking for the situation of being the only one, I was always authentically Black, so didn't feel the need to play the game in that way. Maybe that's why it took me longer. I didn't play the game that way.
Don't hate the player, hate the game. All right, Dr. Whitaker, no doubt about it. Matthew Baldridge. How important is mentorship for a Black man with medical aspirations, and how would you suggest getting one if they don't know any Black doctors? That's good. Now, many of you spoke about mentorship, but what about if you don't even know no Black doctors, know any Black physicians? What do you do?
I think one starting point, depending on what city you're located in, there are chapters of the National Medical Association, which is a national organization that represents African American physicians. And I would encourage an individual perhaps to reach out to that local chapter and see what sort of mentoring resources they have available. So I think that's one example of how you could connect with a group of African American physicians.
All right, cool. All right, if nobody else weighs in, Kathy Bennett asks, thank you, Jason. Jason Williams asked. Let me ask Jason Williams first. Sorry, Kathy, hold on. So Jason says, what are your thoughts on the representation difference between African Americans and other Black immigrants in medicine? Yeah, man. So what happens to the Black diaspora? African, Caribbean, Haitian versus, Black immigrants, coming in from different cultures and countries versus African Americans. Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Let me jump in on that one. One of the things that I think that drives workforce solutions for graduate medical education for medical school is that we have a lot of confirming data that says that when an African-American person goes into medical school, that from the very start, that they think they're going to serve an underserved community. Then you ask them 4 years later, as fourth-year medical students, and they say the same thing. In the largest numbers of any racial group, African-Americans say that they're going to serve in an underserved community. We know that David Carlisle published a paper back in 1976, which shows that African Americans practice disproportionately in African American communities. And there's been at least 25, 30 papers since then that have confirmed that. We know that Black people care for Black people disproportionately as physicians. And what we don't know, though, is whether or not Africans from the diaspora do the same thing. As an immigrant population, folks come to our country with the idea that they want to make money. And unfortunately, you can't make money in our community in some places. And so the idea is, are those individuals still going to serve in our communities? And we find a lot of situations where they do, where Afro-Caribbean and African immigrants serve the African-American community. But I think by and large, we have to make more physicians who come from individuals who've been here multi-generational to ensure that they're going to go back into those communities and serve in the way that we think. This is not to say take anything away from anybody else in the diaspora, but I suspect that if you want to try to fix problems in the underserved African-American community, it's going to take doctors who originate from that environment.
Right. No, it's an extremely important point. And what's interesting is that when we look at the numbers of students who gained admittance, who are Black students who gained admittance to the elite institutions, certainly in undergraduate level, and we can also, y'all can let me know if this is true of a medical school, is that now 55% at least of Black students admitted in an undergraduate level at elite institutions, the top 25, happen to be African or Caribbean. right? So
Michael,
the tensions between some of the native-born Black folk versus African immigrants or those from the African diaspora create some tension in terms of whether there are critiques of African Americans by those who come in. Why you people complain? Why are you talking about race? Why are you obsessed with that? If you come from a predominantly Black culture where you were running stuff, even if you're from a small African nation or from a small Caribbean nation, you know, ain't but 5 of y'all, 10 of y'all, 20 of y'all, but y'all were running everything. You had the prime minister, you had the, you know, president, you had the, you know, minister of education, blah, 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 so that you were used to seeing Black folk running stuff and in control. So is there a similar tension in terms of admittees into medical school? When we count them as Black, do we know what percentage of them are, you know, American born, so to speak, Black folk versus those with who are descended from African or, you know, Caribbean culture? Do we have any idea of that?
Yeah, that information is being collected, and I think it's similar to the trend that you described. I've actually seen data from AAMC where they actually look at African American men and segment it out, native those of African American ancestry versus immigrant population. And I think at the heart of Jason's question is a really important point, because we certainly don't want to promote, you know, division within individuals of color who face some common challenges in our racial caste system. But I think we also want to ensure that we're not ignorant of some of the sort of selection bias that you see with individuals who are immigrants from other countries, right? So they're already coming from a certain, as you described, Professor Dyson, a certain, you know, social strata, they've certain filters that have occurred, that it's going to be very different from someone who's maybe, you know, descendants of African American slaves in the U.S. It's just a different sort of trajectory. And I think it's important to ensure that those individuals can also see themselves as physicians in our healthcare system, and that our healthcare system is also attentive to the importance of ensuring that they're creating opportunities for those individuals who come from that lineage, who have been historically you know, mistreated and disadvantaged, you know, within the United States. So I think that's really important.
Right. No, excellent response there. Kathy Bennett asks, how does the African American defend the historical significance of our contributions to medicine and science that are omitted and be successful? So, Hotep the game. Anybody want to speak about the degree to which, you know, contributions of Black people, you know, in terms of science, you know, Ernest Julian, you know, Ernest Just, Percy Julian, Dr. Charles Drew, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, or even before that, you know, in cultures that prized and embraced scientific and technological advance. Anybody want to weigh in on that?
No, I'm just saying that we all do. We all have that responsibility. And I think that one of the things that we do in every way that we can, we need to bring that back to life. I don't start any presentation to any audience, Black or white, without paying homage to Imhotep, right, and dispelling the rumor that Hippocrates is the father of medicine. I think that we all have to make sure that we get the truth told, no matter what the audience is, no matter what the circumstance is, and no matter what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. That's our responsibility, because if we don't do it, who will? The other thing is that, to the question about the hip hop folks, we need to look at a lot of our institutions are crumbling, and they're crumbling because of lack of financial or fiscal support. Mm-hmm. When I talk about this, you'd all know the names. I don't want to mention them just right now, but I do remember a time when, not that very long ago, Meharry was having difficulty even maintaining residence clerkships for medical students. And also there's still capital needs and other things. So we have to decide. There was a reason why we started historically with Black colleges and universities in the first place. Mm-hmm. And I think there's still a tremendous need for them. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the other things that we need to do is preserve them and grow them and support them, So if there are any of the folks with a few dollars that want to do something, we need to take those dollars and invest in our traditionally African American situations. Now, I will say that obviously the leadership, who's in leadership of those institutions, is extraordinarily important, because I think that we need to make certain that the mission of these organizations remains intact so that they continue to do what they were set out to do. Because Black people not getting into medical school, Black people not getting into engineering schools, Black people not getting into those things are all part of our history. And that was why we started our Black colleges and universities and professional schools in the first place. And we seem to have had a bit of amnesia about this. And so we need to make sure that as we go forward, that there's still a need for all of these institutions, and there's a need to even fortify them so they can afford to recruit and maintain the level of faculty that we need.
Excellent, excellent. Yep, that's a rather insightful and engaging response, to be sure. Tracy Screven, is it Screven? I think Tracy Screven, or unless it's Screven, I think it's Screven. I run a youth STEM pipeline program, and as you all know, exposure is very important. What recommendations do you have for identifying young Black and brown med students and doctors to put in front of high school students for the exposure we know they need? Excellent point.
Well, it sounds like, just looking at some of the questions, 100 Black Men was put forth as a place where, they have mentoring programs as part and parcel of what they do that one would reach out to. Earlier, Derek mentioned the National Medical Association as a possibility. Our local branch is the Cook County Physicians Association. There are also student organizations like the Student National Medical Association. There's needs for mentorship all along the chain, from college to medical school. Even when I became the state health commissioner, I called a brother in another state, said, "Tell me what I need to do and what I don't need to do." So that I don't think we ever stop needing mentorship, because oftentimes we're the first arriving at a place, and we want to be successful and need to learn from the hard-earned wisdom of others.
Excellent, excellent. Let me jump to an urgent consideration here, then I'll jump back up. So I don't know if it's Dr. Lorena Chikoy or Chikoye. I'm so sorry, I don't mean to butcher your name. Dr. Lorena Chikoy, I think, who is a family medicine doctor in Miami, Florida. She got her medical degree from University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health. Has been in practice for more than 20 years. She says we need to start introducing medicine at a younger age, high school. Do you agree? And what can you do in that vein?
I definitely agree. There's a program that is sponsored by the National Institutes of Health that almost nobody knows about, and it allows high school students to write their own grants to work in laboratories of existing scholars who have NIH funding. So the National Institutes of Health funds a lot of the extramural research, that is research that's done outside of the National Institutes of Health in universities and hospitals and academic medical centers around the country. And if you Google this string, P as in Papa, A as in Alpha, -05-015, you'll learn about a program that's called, what's it called? It's a program to increase diversity in health-related sciences. And it is sponsored by the NIH, and they will put extra dollars into the existing grant of someone who has 2 years of funding on their grant so that you can go and work in their laboratory. And this starts at high school, and it goes all the way through medical school, graduate school, residency, all the way to being junior faculty. So that's a wonderful program that nobody knows about, and that offers you an opportunity to write your own grant. And I guarantee you, if you reached out to a scientist that you know about this program and here's an opportunity to work with them, they would welcome you into their environment. And my expectation is that that will be the start of a fantastic career for you.
All right.
And they'll pay you to work in that lab.
Excellent.
The other thing, the CPASS Foundation actually has a mini medical school program that's currently at Rush University. And I think we're starting it up at Chicago Medical School for sixth graders to learn about medicine, to get exposed to African American and Latinx doctors. And so we have started that program, and we're taking it to different medical schools throughout the Chicagoland area, and for sixth, seventh, and eighth graders.
Excellent. Excellent responses. Selena Yvette Smith says or asks, what advice can you give to young men who would like to pursue a career in medicine but are battling meeting the qualification? Example, low science GPA, mediocre MCAT. How does one bounce back, and is it ever too late?
I'll jump in and say, one, for them not to be discouraged. Two, not to be defined by the test score. All of us on this call know that, I think tests measure two things. One, how well you can take a test, as well as the information that's covered on it. And so certainly we want to ensure that, folks who are struggling and trying to bounce back get the support that they need, if there are additional information that they need to learn to, get exposure to that, but also learning how to take these exams, as Dr. McDade noted earlier in his comments, is critically important. And I know when I went to medical school, I benefited from being part of a cohort of students who were at different stages of their career. From my mindset, I thought I had to go straight from college into medical school and then into the workforce, but I had a chance to learn with individuals who maybe they had a career in teaching or engineering or in ministry, and then came into medical school. And so I saw examples of individuals who did not take a straight linear path. And they've turned out to be great physicians and great peer instructors. So never too late, don't give up, don't be defined by the numbers, be persistent.
Yeah, that's great advice. There's a guy who worked in the Byrne patent office because he was bad at math. He started late. He said that the reason he was able to be smarter about math is because he was, quote, retarded, this is his own word, in his growth and development. And then he caught on later. And he said, because I got into it later, because my growth was, quote, retarded, or at least delayed, I was able to go into it deeper than kids, who usually go into it, right? I was a little bit older. His name was Albert Einstein. I think he turned out pretty good. I think he's a pretty smart guy, even though he was flunking math and doing stuff early on. So, if Einstein can do it, you can do it too. And am I saying that some of y'all are Einsteins? Darn right. Am I saying some of y'all are, Imhotep? Exactly right. Am I saying some of y'all are African scientists and geniuses? I absolutely am. Am I saying that you're capable of lifting yourself up and moving beyond where people drop you because they feel that you don't have the skills? Abso-darn-lutely. I was a teen father, hustled on the streets of Detroit, didn't go to college until I was 21. And then, went on to get a Ph.D. and try to make up for lost time. So, I ain't no doctor. I mean, not no real doctor. I'm just, doctor, not medical doctor. So just call me Michael. Akil El Amin. This is a great one to end on considering today. Considering the current state of the Black male mental state, what is best recommended to pull them out of the darkness so that they can thrive? So considering the current state of the Black male mental state, what is best recommended to pull them out of the darkness so that they can thrive?
I'll take a stab. Michael, I know you have some things because I know your background. So I know you because there's a couple, three questions in that question. At least couple, three.
Right.
But first of all, you've got to find, and let me just use myself as an example. I had to find a strength within that allowed me to be able to negate all of the negative forces without. And for me, that was the Nation of Islam when I was a very younger man. And a number of the people, both in and out of my family, that saw that this was something that could be done. They didn't know how to tell me to do it, but they only knew that in order to do anything, you had to work hard at it. And if it's something you didn't know, find somebody who did, right, and ask them to help you. And most times they would. So I think that you need to look for some support. It may come from friends, it may come from family, it may come from people you don't even know. But sometimes when people know that you're looking, you'd be surprised who responds to your need. So, and that's why organizations like CPASS, organizations like brothers on this phone, on this call represent, and people like Derek who are at these other places oftentimes may seem insurmountable, but you'd be surprised as just, if you're really serious, you can find a way to get in touch with somebody. That's everybody right on this call, and even folks not on this call. So you need to take it, if you believe you've got a light that you just need to help get somebody to help shine your mirror so it can shine a little bit brighter, then that's what you do. I wasn't the smartest guy in school. I wish I was as smart as Bill McDade, but I'm not. But that doesn't mean that I can't do things. And it doesn't mean you can't do things. It's just, how well do you believe that that's what you want to do? And how hard are you willing to work to meet that goal?
Beautiful. Can't be better stated than that. The Reverend Dr. Professor Terry Mason, putting it down.
Don't leave God out either, too, Mike.
I ain't no doubt about that now. So what a remarkable night. I want y'all to give tremendous love to Doctors Mason and Robinson and Whitaker and McDade for the extraordinary virtuosity that they have exhibited in directing us to think about, reflect on, and engage with the issue of trying to broaden the horizon and, deepen the engagement in our culture with physicians, because we need them. We need Black doctors. We are living in a pandemic. In fact, we're living in what they call a syndemic, the convergence of two pandemics. On the one, a global virus that has decimated the world, upwards of 80,000 people dead in America alone. And we know at least 80-some thousand African-American people dead as a result of this, the disproportionate numbers of Black people who have died from this disease. Now, this virus, why? Because we have pre-existing conditions, hypertension, diabetes, asthma, heart disease. And now some folk would say, well, why don't Black folk take better care of themselves? Well, again, it's a systemic issue. If we had better access to healthcare, if we didn't use still, as poor Black people and working class Black people, the emergency ward as medical maintenance and preservation. And we all know we ain't got to be a doctor with these brilliant genius doctors we got on here today to know that by the time you get to the emergency ward, and that's how you maintain it and preserving, the disease process is further along than it would have ordinarily been had you had access to high quality health care. And then at the same time, we know if they got the ghetto grocer, because you ain't got Whole Foods, you ain't even got half foods. In fact, you ain't got a quarter food. You got a food desert. And so, you ain't even got Piggly Wiggly. So the thing is that you got the ghetto grocer with the mystery cuts of meat. And then you got the high sugar content cereal that is out here that you are feeding your kids. So the systemic issues, the structural inequities play a role in what we have access to. But then we got the COVID-16-19. You got COVID-19 and COVID-16-19. The vicious brutality, the deeply entrenched anti-Blackness that continues to imperil Black lives in this culture. Today was a good day, as Ice Cube would say. Mama cooked the breakfast without the hog. Okay. But the point is, we had a good day because on this day the death of George Floyd was at least partially redressed. As the Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, said, this is not justice. This is accountability. It's a road to justice. It's on the route to justice, right? Remember in The Godfather, when the opening scene, when the Undertaker asked the Godfather basically to murk these kids who have, abused his daughter. And then he says, well, what do you want me to do? And he comes around, and he whispers to him, I want you to kill these guys. He said, that is not justice. Your daughter is still alive. Well, George Floyd is dead. So justice can't be the assignment of 15 to 20 years of Officer Chauvin, former Officer Chauvin. Real justice is a structural and systemic transformation that prevents police culture from misbehaving and in its misconduct with impunity, attacking and targeting Black people with vicious particularity. So we need doctors to deal with the public health issue of racial injustice. It is indeed an epidemiological function that needs to intervene, but it's a medical issue too, because our blood pressure gets, it rises, the sugars that flood our bodies, the stresses that give us pause as we try to go forward. And we just saw the study came out today. I know y'all saw it, that said if you're in your middle age and you ain't getting more than 6 hours of sleep, you got a likelihood to develop dementia in your late 70s. Damn, I'm 62. I'm trying to get some more sleep tonight. So the thing is that we've got to take care of ourselves, right? And young Black people, especially in Black Lives Matter, have talked to us about self-care. Where doctors major in that. Physicians help us understand that. And if we had more Black men to demythologize this toxic masculinity that makes us believe that if you go to the doctor, you ain't no real man. No, I'm cool. I'm gonna suck it up. Yeah, I'm hurting, but that's all right. So our disinclination to visit the physician has led to such poor health outcomes for us. We need the encouragement of these incredible, brilliant doctors that we see tonight. And then toward that end, since I'm a Baptist preacher, let me do the begging for the dough. I know it's supposed to be gentle and light. These are medical professionals. They are not bombastic in the way us Baptist preachers are. But let me do my Baptist preacher thing and beg y'all for some money, because I need y'all to donate to the CPASS Foundation Fund. And donating is an investment in the STEM and STEAM futures of vibrant students and ultimately our communities. We need more doctors. We need more scientists. We need more engineers. We need more mathematicians. We need more people. And we know Black men got skills. If you're on the street trying to figure out in your head what the cut is on the stuff you're doing in the street pharmaceutical economy and the underground economy, you got skills. Let's turn them, let's transform them into healthy, uplifting, edifying practices. So visit cpassfoundation.org/invest-in-us. Let me say that again, because I know that's a lot. CPASS Foundation, CPASSFoundation.org/invest-in-us. Please do it, y'all. Give what you can. Make a donation. It's extremely important. You saw these brilliant minds on display here. The intelligence, the eloquence, the elegance, the capacity, the passion, the desire to help us. They could have been doing anything on this night, but they have devoted themselves, not only this night, but in their lives, to make room to evangelize, so to speak, for the broadening of the horizon of Black physicians, Black male doctors in particular, to address our needs. So again, that's cpassfoundation.org/invest-in-us. Please donate. It's an extremely important organization, and they need your support, and we as a community need what they do. So what an honor. I guess I'll turn it back over to Dr. Whitaker. What an honor it was to hang out with y'all tonight, to be an honorary doctor for 2 hours. I feel like I got my medical degree. I'm going to go out here and start practicing. Okay, no, I'm not going to do that. But I'm going to go out here and spread the message and evangelize, because I think it's extremely important to have physicians. As I told you, my son is an anesthesiologist, and he's a remarkable young man, still doing his thing out here with his 2 kids. He was assisted by Dr. Terry Mason, you know, because Terry Mason was one of the first doctors that he met in his life, because Dr. Mason and my wife were classmates, even though I think she's young enough to be his daughter, but I'm not sure. But classmates together. And Dr. Mason has been a staple in the Dyson family, a remarkably brilliant, compassionate a young man and physician who gave us a sense of what was possible and tutored and mentored Mwada Dyson, took him under his wings and did an extraordinary job. And of course, Dr. McDade assisted him greatly when it was time for him to enter medical school and to make it through. So I want to thank those 2 physicians. I want to thank Dr. Robinson, Dr. Whitaker, Dr. McDade, and Dr. Mason for your extraordinary work. Let me turn it over again then to Dr. Eric Whitaker, but please give some dough, give some cash, give some money to this worthy and remarkable foundation. Dr. Whitaker.
Well, Reverend Doctor, I don't know about anywhere else. There was some amens going on in my household. So I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. As mentioned earlier, I'm the chairman of the CPASS Foundation, and just want to make a few closing remarks. First of all, I want to thank our esteemed moderator, Reverend Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, and our panelists who, as mentioned, have all meant a lot in my life. They were phenomenal. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion as much as I did, and want to thank you panelists again. Today, we know that minority patients benefit from having minority doctors. That's data supported. We desperately need doctors from underrepresented groups to not only treat patients from diverse populations, but also to tap into what are really high income opportunities that healthcare offers. Yet, minority students are woefully underrepresented in medical and other health professional schools, as we've talked about this evening. This is a dire situation for our country, in which we're becoming a majority minority nation. The US population is projected to grow over 10% by 2033, with most of the growth occurring in minority cohorts. How can we ensure the health of our far more diverse US populace without taking action now to reverse the trends that we've talked about tonight as it relates to physician workforce? 2020 was a whirlwind of uncertainty. Everything we faced, from life-threatening disease, job losses, a distressed economy, school closings, food insecurity, and tumultuous protests, have made us committed at the CPASS Foundation more than ever to our purpose of really nurturing the talent of the future and building a healthy, not a leaky pipeline of minority physicians and other health professions. To learn more, as Reverend Doctor talked about it, you can find out about our programs and activity that span from 6th grade up through after medical school and post-baccalaureate programs at cpassfoundation.org. So finally, on behalf of the CPASS board, we welcome your engagement in this effort to change the lives of so many Black and brown scholars and to prepare our youth for the health and health tech careers of the future. So again, it's been a phenomenal evening. Thank you and good evening.